I want you to imagine, just for a second, that your identity, your name, your history, the biological connections that actually wire you to the rest of humanity, imagine that none of it is actually yours.
Which is, I mean, that's a pretty jarring thing to ask someone to imagine.
Right. But imagine that your identity is merely a state-issued contract, like a legal fiction that a bureaucracy can just amend, seal, and completely rewrite without your consent.
Yeah, it's deeply unsettling because, we tend to view our identities as intrinsic. We see them as these undeniable facts of nature that we're just, well, born with.
Exactly. But here is a wild paradox for you to chew on. The state can seal your original birth record, right? They can legally erase your biological history with a single stamp, and the administrative cost of that is exactly $0.
Right, zero.
But then you look at private DNA databases, the ones that promise to reconnect you with that exact same biological truth. And those companies are valued at billions of dollars.
Oh, totally. The state erases your history for free, and then the free market just turns around and sells it back to you for billions.
It's crazy.
It really is. And, that paradox perfectly illustrates the immense, undeniable human drive to know one's origins, but also it shows the massive institutional machinery built to control, to gatekeep, and honestly profit from that information.
And that collision, that crash between biology and bureaucracy, that is our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into a really comprehensive stack of essays and research from a publication called Thoughtless Delineation.
Yeah, specifically focusing on a framework they call the subscription identity.
Right. And this material, it forensically audits the global adoption industry, family separation policies, and what they call the systemic erasure of original identities.
Yeah, and just a quick heads up before we get fully into the weeds here, this analysis takes a highly critical, really unvarnished look at government and corporate adoption systems. So we are not here to take a political stance or endorse a specific ideology today. Our job is simply to put this framework under the microscope, map out the arguments, and just, see what we find.
Impartially.
Exactly. And to do that accurately, we will be using the specific terminology that the authors demand, which they call honest adoption language.
Yeah, so if you're listening, you are going to hear us using terms like separated from instead of placed, or we'll say natural mother instead of birth mother.
Right, because this is about honoring the specific linguistic framework of the material so we can properly understand their argument.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're kind of dividing our focus. I'm going to hold down what the analysis calls the subsonic register.
Which is heavy on the biology.
Yeah, it means I'll be looking at the visceral, first-person, actual bodily experience of biological origin and family separation.
And I'll be anchoring the adaptive and systemic register. So I will be looking at the macro level, what the text calls the architecture of silence. This is the legal structures, the economic incentives, the actual institutional mechanisms making this whole system run.
So let's start with that literal architecture. Because if you want to understand how a human identity can literally be overwritten, you have to look at the specific administrative paperwork that makes it happen.
The legal mandate.
Right. How does a bureaucracy legally erase someone's origins?
Well, it happens through a foundational mechanism that the authors call genealogical nullification.
Genealogical nullification.
Yeah, it's a heavy term. But it occurs when a family separation is finalized under what's known as the plenary adoption system.
Plenary meaning.
Absolutely. Complete. Unlike a guardianship, right, where a child is cared for but still retains their original identity, a plenary adoption demands total legal severance. The state essentially performs an administrative disappearance.
Wow.
They take the original birth certificate, the OBC, and they physically lock it in a vault and legally seal it.
And once that original document is in the vault, what actually replaces it?
Well, the state issues an amended birth certificate, or an ABC, but this isn't just a certificate that names new legal guardians. No, it is far more absolute than that. The amended birth certificate falsely lists the adoptive parents as the biological progenitors.
Wait, it
literally claims they gave birth to the child.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where the logic just feels like it entirely breaks down for me.
Sure.
A birth certificate, traditionally, is a historical record of a physical event. A specific person was born on a specific day to specific biological parents. How can a state retroactively alter a physical historical event into a fiction?
I know. It's
like that borders on state-sanctioned gaslighting.
It does, but you have to understand that the system prioritizes legal conformity over biological truth. It's built entirely on this philosophy of the clean break.
The clean.
Right. The industry frames adoption not as a child having dual belonging, where they acknowledge their past while moving into a new family, but as total substitution.
Ah, so the old identity has to go.
Completely. It must be entirely eradicated for the new one to be considered legally legitimate, and this creates what the analysis calls an ontological closed loop.
Okay, ontological is a pretty heavy word. Break that phrase down for us.
Well, ontology is the philosophical study of being and reality. So an ontological closed loop means the state creates this self-contained reality loop. The amended birth certificate becomes a document of supreme authority that wipes a child's bloodline by legislative fiat.
Wow.
The state basically says, this new document is the only reality that exists, and the old reality never happened. It creates a purely paper lineage.
The analysis uses a brilliant analogy for this that really clicked for me when I was reading it.
Oh, the operating system one.
Yes. It says it's like a computer's operating system being entirely wiped by a third party.
Yeah.
You have your original source code, right? Your biology, your ancestry, your genetic predispositions.
Yeah.
But then the state steps in, wipes the hard drive, installs a fictional bootleg operating system, and then legally password protects the BIOS.
Exactly.
You are forbidden by law from ever accessing your original source code again.
And that mechanism enforces compliance. You are forced to operate on the state-installed software, and any attempt to find your original programming is treated as a breach of contract.
Which is wild.
The architecture of silence demands that everyone just pretends the bootleg software is the original.
But here is the massive flaw in that legal logic, especially from the subsonic register. The paperwork might confidently declare that the past has been erased. The judge hits the gavel, the ink dries on the ABC.
Right.
But an infant's nervous system didn't sign a contract. The human body remembers.
This is exactly where the structural paperwork crashes headfirst into biophysics.
Yes. Welcome to the subsonic register. The analysis explores the visceral reality of this trauma using something called photon sheet theory.
Right.
It conceptualizes human identity as a biological weave, like an intricate fabric of genealogical and temperamental frequencies that interlock with our biological kin. So when a family separation occurs, it isn't just a change of address.
No.
It is a surgical cut to that fabric. It leaves what they call corrupted edges.
And those corrupted edges are not just some, poetic metaphor for grief or sadness. There is a deeply documented neurobiological consequence to that surgical cut.
Yeah, I know the material dives into some pretty intense genetics here.
Yeah.
What exactly is happening in the body at the moment of that separation?
So we have to look at the hypomethylation of the FKBP5 gene.
Okay, FKBP5. What does that actually mean for the person experiencing this in practical terms?
Think of the FKBP5 gene as the chemical handbrake on cortisol.
Cortisol being the stress hormone.
Exactly, our primary stress hormone. Methylation is a biological process that basically turns genes on or off. So when an infant experiences the primal physical trauma of maternal separation, that chemical handbrake is profoundly altered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the hypomethylation essentially removes the braking mechanism. The body is thrown into a permanent, constitutively primed, high-alert state.
So because the biological anchors are suddenly gone, the nervous system locks into permanent hypervigilance.
Precisely. It literally rewires how the body processes stress on a molecular level. The infant is constantly flooded with cortisol because the body knows its survival source has vanished.
Regardless of how nice the new crib is.
Exactly. Which brings us to the 5D split framework. Because of that biological reality you just described, the separated individual is forced to exist across two asynchronous signals for the rest of their life.
Two competing signals.
Right. First, there's the subsonic pressure, that deep, ancient biological hum of their true origin, the permanent fight-or-flight alert that the body just holds on to. But layered right over that is the adaptive frequency.
The bootleg software.
Yes, the socially constructed identity imposed by the state and the adoptive environment.
If you are listening to this, imagine trying to tune a car radio to like a light pop station, but there's this heavy, dark bass frequency constantly rumbling underneath it, rattling the speakers. You can never get the station to come in clearly.
That's a great way to picture it.
So if the body holds onto this trauma so tightly, and the cortisol is constantly flooding the system, what happens when a person tries to maintain that socially constructed identity for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Does the blank slate theory actually hold up?
The analysis argues that it inevitably collapses, and that collapse is explained by a concept called the identity gravity well.
The identity gravity well.
Yeah. You see, identity is not a static construct that you just set and forget. It is a dynamic field of force.
Okay.
For years, sometimes decades, an individual might successfully maintain the external scaffolding of the adaptive chosen identity. They perform the role the paperwork demands.
They play the part.
Exactly. But eventually, under the weight of time or an external stressor or a triggering event, like maybe having a child of their own, that scaffolding splinters.
And when the scaffolding splinters, they fall.
They are pulled uncontrollably back into the subsonic truth of their origins. The identity gravity well exerts this inescapable pull down to the foundational reality of their biology.
Which has to be completely overwhelming.
It often results in severe psychosocial disruption. And what's wild is it's frequently misdiagnosed by therapists as generalized anxiety or depression or other mental health conditions.
When in reality,
It's the trauma of the 5D split finally demanding to be reconciled.
it's literally the body refusing to live the legal fiction anymore.
Yes.
But this raises a massive question. If the biological toll of this split is so severe, I mean, if it alters a person's genetics and inevitably leads to this gravity well collapse, why does the state continue to enforce it? Why does the system persist at all?
If we want to understand why the institutional machinery keeps turning despite the human cost, the analysis points to a very old, very simple rule. Follow the money.
Okay, let's look at the systemic register here. What are the economics of family separation?
Well, we are looking at a U.S. adoption market valued at roughly $31.42 billion.
Billion, with a B.
With a B. And when a market reaches that size, it requires a massive supply chain to sustain itself. To understand how an industry that large maintains its power over state policy, we really have to look at regulatory capture.
Okay, regulatory capture, that's a term usually used in economics or like environmental policy, right?
Yeah.
It's when the industry being regulated essentially takes over the government agencies that are responsible for regulating them.
That is exactly it. The watchdogs become entirely compromised by the industry they're supposed to be watching.
And the text gives examples of this.
Oh, the framework provides a very specific, glaring example involving the National Council for Adoption, or the NCFA.
Right, the NCFA.
This organization acts as the primary lobbying arm for private adoption agencies. And the material highlights a blatant revolving door between this private lobby and the federal government.
Oh, boy.
For instance, it tracks how an individual named Ryan Hanlon transitioned directly from being the NCFA's chief lobbyist to becoming the associate commissioner of the U.S. Children's Bureau.
Okay, let me make sure I'm hearing this correctly. The person whose literal job description was to lobby for the financial interests of the private adoption industry was placed at the head of the federal agency that oversees billions of dollars in child welfare and foster care funding.
That is the documented progression, yes.
Wow.
And the analysis argues that under that kind of leadership, policies inevitably shift. They prioritize recruitment and placement expansion over family preservation.
Because the goal becomes moving units rather than supporting vulnerable families.
Right. But the economic integration goes even deeper, straight into the medical system.
Yeah. The framework details a $324,160 federal grant awarded to the NCFA to train hospital staff to provide options counseling to patients facing unplanned pregnancies.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Thinking about this from the subsonic bodily register, that sounds like an invasive biological parasite. It attaches itself to a maternity ward, which should be a place of medical care, and turns it into a logistical intake node. They are literally using federal money to train nurses to act as talent scouts for a multi-billion-dollar private industry. They're commodifying human connection right at the moment of birth.
It subsidizes the acquisition of children.
Which brings up a structural contradiction that honestly stopped me in my tracks when reading this.
The tax credit.
Yes. The U.S. government offers a massive financial stimulant to wealthy prospective parents. We are talking about a $13,460 adoption tax credit to help offset the exorbitant fees of acquiring a child through these private agencies.
That's a huge subsidy. If you are listening to this and wondering, wait, if the goal is child welfare, why isn't that same $13,460 offered as direct cash assistance to the resourceless natural mother so she can keep her baby? I mean, you aren't alone. Why does society accept this economic structure?
The framework breaks down the grim calculus behind it. Basically, a family kept together costs the state money.
Right.
It requires sustained long-term investment, housing, healthcare, job training, social support. But a family separated generates revenue.
It's a business model.
It triggers an incredibly lucrative cascade of billable actions. Think about the ecosystem here. Lawyers charge for terminating rights, agencies charge matching fees, social workers charge for home studies, and courts charge filing fees.
So the structure of the market rewards separation because it feeds an entire constellation of secondary industries.
Exactly.
So poverty just becomes a conversion point. A natural mother's temporary lack of resources is capitalized on, translating her child into a highly profitable commodity for the industry.
It's very bleak.
It is. Recognizing the vastness of this systemic machinery and coupling it with the neurobiological trauma of the 5D split, it feels like staring into a void. It could very easily lead to total cynicism.
It could, and historically many advocates get stuck in that despair. But what is deeply compelling about this framework is that it insists recognizing the harm is only the second stage of awareness.
It's not the end point.
No. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis introduces the concept of post-tragic consciousness.
Post-tragic consciousness. I like that.
Right. It's the conscious, deliberate choice to fully integrate the reality of the harm, to look directly at the structural violence, the corrupted edges, the money, and then turn toward agency and reconstruction.
You can't just wallow in the open wound.
You cannot. It is about demanding tangible systemic reform rather than settling for symbolic apologies from the state.
So let's talk about what that reconstruction actually looks like in practice, because the demands here are very specific.
Systemically, the framework outlines several non-negotiable demands to dismantle the architecture of silence. First, establishing a National Commissioner for Family Separation.
Okay. To do what?
To provide lifelong oversight, acknowledging that family separation is a lifelong event, not a singular transaction that just magically resolves when a child turns 18.
Right, because the trauma doesn't end at 18.
Exactly. Second, ending all vetoes on original records, making access to your own original birth certificate a fundamental civil right, entirely unhindered by the state.
No more vaults.
No more vaults. And third, implementing no-fault, no-fee adoption discharges.
I really want to highlight that last one. A no-fault, no-fee discharge means that an adult who was separated as an infant would have the absolute legal right to dissolve that state-issued contract.
Completely.
They could undo the legal fiction and restore their original identity without having to pay thousands of dollars in court fees or prove abuse to reverse a decision they never even consented to in the first place.
It legally restores original identities and returns sovereignty to the individual. It breaks the ontological closed loop.
And on the individual level, moving back to the subsonic register, the framework introduces sovereign inquiry. This is where you fight back against the bureaucracy on a bodily level.
The somatic therapies.
Yeah, the material mentions something called the cytoic protocol, which involves using somatic therapies to reclaim neuropsychosocial stability. How does someone heal the biology to fight the bureaucracy?
Well, the protocol focuses heavily on therapies like vagus nerve regulation.
Yeah.
The vagus nerve is essentially the superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system. It controls our ability to rest and digest.
Okay.
Remember the FKBP5 gene hypomethylation we discussed earlier? That permanent cortisol flood?
The chemical handbrake being removed.
Right. By utilizing somatic practices that physically stimulate and regulate the vagus nerve, an individual can manually begin to pull their body out of that permanent fight-or-flight state.
That's incredible.
The framework describes these therapies as molecular-level firewalls. If the state tries to wipe your hard drive and install an adaptive frequency, regulating your vagus nerve builds a physical firewall in your nervous system to protect your original source code.
It grounds you in the subsonic reality.
Right.
It is about demanding relational permanence, the undeniable truth of your blood, your biology, and your ancestors over the artificial legal permanence imposed by a judge's gavel.
Yes.
And a massive part of sovereign inquiry is refusing the linguistic gaslighting of the industry.
Refusing the compulsory gratitude.
Yes, the societal expectation that a person who is separated from their natural family must perform continuous lifelong gratitude for being saved or chosen. Sovereign inquiry is the absolute refusal to smile and say thank you for the erasure of your own history.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We journeyed through a highly complex, critical audit of an industry that operates largely in the shadows of public goodwill.
We really did. We started by unpacking genealogical nullification, exploring how a physical historical event is locked in a vault and turned into a state-mandated legal fiction through plenary adoption.
We dove into the visceral bodily reality of the 5D split, the hypomethylation of the FKBP5 gene, and how the identity gravity well inevitably pulls a person's adaptive scaffolding down.
And we followed the money. We examined the $31.42 billion architecture of regulatory capture, the revolving door of lobbying, and the economic incentives that literally drive family separation.
And finally, we turn toward post-tragic consciousness, exploring the systemic demand for no-fault, no-fee discharges, and the bodily reclamation of sovereign inquiry.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the concept of identity. It makes you realize how fragile our personal histories can be when they're placed in the hands of an institution.
It does, and it raises an urgent question, one that I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over today.
Okay, what is it?
Well, the frameworks we explored meticulously detail how state and industry apparatuses used paper records, sealed vaults, and closed legal systems to commodify and rewrite human identities over the last century.
The era of the filing cabinet and the ink stamp?
Exactly. But as we move rapidly into a new era, an era where artificial intelligence, predictive algorithms, and privatized digital databases become the ultimate arbiters of truth and history, how vulnerable are our personal identities today?
Oh, wow.
If a paper bureaucracy could effectively erase and rewrite millions of biological histories with a single stamp, how easily could our identities be entirely overwritten, marginalized, or erased by the next generation of institutional machinery?
If your identity is just a subscription, you really have to wonder who owns the platform. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of your source code.